everyone. It's so great to be here. Thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you, John, for that great presentation. I'm also going to try sharing some slides. Um, I guess someone shout out if it doesn't work. I'm going to assume that it's working. um, it turns out that a lot of what I wanted to share has actually already been shared by other people, so that's great. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit more about myself, hit on a few key points that I want to emphasize from what other people have said, and then that'll leave time for discussion, hopefully at the end where we can talk more. A couple things that I forgot to include in that intro that Tom read, for your perspective, in case there's interest and comments, is that previous internship experiences that I've had have included being a Defenders of Wildlife in DC, which is a national nonprofit that focuses on wildlife issues. I was at the Department of Interior this previous summer. I was actually at the working with the legal team that works with the Bureau of Land Management. And then I was also at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office in their Environmental Protection Division earlier this year. So I kind of had a flavor of a couple of different experiences, nonprofit, state, federal government. Still trying to figure out what I'm going to do after I graduate, but I do hope to be in government service sooner rather than later, is kind of my interest in. That's also kind of my interest in the law too, is natural resources, environmental law, and public lands. I think is a really interesting topic that I've done a lot of thinking about, and I did some work on, like I said, at the Interior Department. I like the topic of the panel, and I think what I wanted to offer is a couple of things from my own experiences of um, thinking about when I think about that topic of bridging the divide between religion and environmentalism. The thing that I thought about immediately was like how, as people of faith, perhaps we can engage with the broader environmental community, and also I'll throw in some legal thoughts in there as well. And I say that to get into it, I say that I guess as someone who my faith is very important to me and like really influences my um, interests in environmental issues. And I've always felt a little weird about that. I grew up in the East. That's why I have a picture of the Blue Jay on here. Some of you Westerners may not be as familiar with maybe more familiar with the Western cousins of the Blue Jay, but hopefully you get to see one. Um, and so I've always had this interest from a young age for these issues. Um, and that's what I've carried into law school. But I've often felt a bit of an oddball, a bit of an outsider, because I come to these issues um, from a particular angle that's influenced by my faith. And sometimes I feel like that's weird. Like maybe people don't want to talk about that. Um, but there are two experiences that have changed that for me. On the left is Kathy Meyer. I took the animal law clinic, was an animal law clinic participant. Harvard has an animal law clinic. She's the director of it. She is a pioneer and kind of a legend in the animal legal movement. I'm interested in biodiversity issues in particular, and endangered species, and so that's why I wanted to take it. But again, I came into it thinking like, what are they going to think of me? This like Mormon thinks he can get involved in this, and like Kathy, like this self-described hippie and vegan and cool lady. What would she think? And like it came up in our first meeting together, and she was like, "You're Mormon?" She's very uh extroverted and outspoken, I would say. And it came up, and it was fine. She was interested, and if not, didn't really matter to the work. She was happy to have me on board. On the right is Andy Mergen, who is the director of the environmental law clinic here at Harvard. And I had a similar experience with him. He had been at he had been at the Justice Department in their environmental division for 30 years. And when I asked him about government careers and was curious about what kind of path I could have there, one of the things he said to me was, at the Department of Justice, we're interested in having particularly LDS people because they understand Western issues. They know what the environment is. And there was maybe, I think at the time that he was there, he mentioned maybe like 2 or 3 BYU grads. I'm a BYU grad, and not that all we all have to be BYU grads, but there's only 2 or 3 in the entire Department of Justice's environmental division. So my point is, I think that it's important for us to show up as people of faith in these spaces, and I think it's welcomed. And if it's not welcomed, there's so many crises that are going on that I don't think that people really care. I think they're happy to have another person on the team, another person to row with them. So that's my first thing I want to say for bridging that gap is that get involved. Um, for me, that has meant that I hopefully will get to devote my career to it. But we can't all have that choice. And if you're someone who has only like 30 minutes on a Saturday to do that, I want to talk about a few different ways that you can also get involved um, from a legal perspective, and would love to talk more in the discussion section because I'm just going to fly by a couple of these. And again, other people have already mentioned. One of them is, of course, getting involved in federal lawmaking and writing to your representatives. Um, we had someone from SUA on earlier, and she talked about the great efforts that they're doing there. I'm going to mention SUA again because I think that they do a lot of great work in this space. But somebody else mentioned, I think, too, that our environmental statutes are big ones. The Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, mostly passed decades ago and are maybe not exactly up to the challenges of today. And so if we want new laws passed, we need to be advocating for it. But that one, we're engaged citizens. I want to talk about something maybe that is less obvious. And real fast, I should mention too that when I'm talking about these things in terms of bridging the gap between religion and the environment, I put on this slide right before because somebody mentioned the Wilderness Act, and I was like, oh, I've got to talk about the Wilderness Act too. I think it's really interesting looking at laws insofar as we feel like the law does not reflect whatever we feel are should be the priorities of the government and the way that we have a relationship with the land. Like it's written into the law. And I think a prime example of that is comparing the Bureau of Land Management's primary statute, FLTMA, on the left, and the Wilderness Act on the right. FLTMA, I'm not going to read it to you, but you can see that there's a bajillion different things that are supposed to happen on BLM managed lands, or that BLM managed lands are encouraged to be used for, including in kind of at the bottom there that they are used for resources, including minerals, food, timber. The Wilderness Act, on the other hand, has a completely different approach, and that's the way that the law was written. And I think Aldo Leopold, who's been mentioned a couple of times, I think he had a hand in writing part of the statute where it's recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, or man himself is a visitor who does not remain. And there's a huge range of different ways that we treat public lands. Everything, these are kind of maybe the two ends of it, I would say. National Park Service has Park Service lands that are more conservation minded, but not exactly Wilderness Act. So the point is, if we want to see our values in the law, we need to change the law. One of the ways to do that is by, writing your senators. The other, and the arguably in some ways in today's era, the more important one is getting involved in agencies. Agencies do a ton of maybe primarily the lawmaking today. And there are ways to be involved here, which John also mentioned. And so I think that's great. This is just one example. Well, when an agency writes a rule, a lot of the times that has to go up for something called notice and comment, which means that they solicit comments from the public. And as John said, I think that regulators and people who are writing these rules, they really do take seriously these comments. In fact, they are required by law to read all of the comments and offer some kind of response to them. The public lands rule has been a very controversial one. And because of that, BLM held meetings over the summer earlier this year. None of them were in Utah, unfortunately, for those of you who are in Utah, but I think there were ones in Nevada and Colorado. So there are these opportunities to be involved, to submit comments, to have your voice heard. And the government is required to take notice of that. That's like difficult to do. It's hard to keep up with federal rulemaking. Like this is a topic that I'm interested in. I don't even know half the things that the government is up to at half the time. So there are organizations that do this for us and help us kind of streamline and put issues in front of us that they think are important. So I would encourage you to be involved in those organizations, subscribe to their mailing lists. Again, SUA, I think, is a really great example. They do a lot of commenting on agency rulemaking, and they have ways of helping you have comment language that you can submit. And I'd encourage you too that when you're submitting that comment language that you personalize it. And I think this is a way for us to show up as people of faith, is to write about how those values influence our our decisions and the reasons that we're advocating for something. To close, I'll just echo this great thing that George Handley said. Religion is a call to faithful and moral action on behalf of what we love. And so I think, again, if what we love is the environment and we want to have faith and want to take direct action, I think that's a really important thing to do, is that our faith will to bridge that gap between religion and environmentalism. We should be acting. We should be trying to see our values put into practice. So thanks for hearing from me, and excited to hear more in the discussion and hear from more from our other panelists.